Hello and welcome to another Keep Michigan Learning webinar hosted by Michigan Virtual. I'm Dr. Chris Harrington, and today I'm privileged to have Dr. Mark Deschaine from the University of Mississippi join me to share his perspectives on supporting students with disabilities in remote learning environments. Quickly though, before we get started, I'd like to share a webpage with you that contains many resources specific to learning continuity during extended school closures. The resources are all freely available on the Michigan Virtual website, and that's at the URL listed on this screen here, michiganvirtual.org/learning-continuity. I hope you take a few moments after this session to explore those resources. Well, hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you as you're so highly regarded with broad expertise in educational leadership, and especially because of your expertise in the area of supporting students with disabilities in remote or virtual learning environments. Could you please share a little of your background as it pertains to this particular topic?
Sure. I currently serve as an associate professor of educational leadership in the School of Education at the University of Mississippi. There I help prepare future principals and superintendents, and we confer master's, ed specialist, EDD, and PhD degrees there. Since 2016, I've worked as a research fellow with the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, and we've published a couple of papers and things that we can discuss later. We've supported the Michigan State Superintendent with a policy brief, and it's given me a wonderful opportunity to meet with a lot of professionals across the nation to explore areas that we're all very much interested in. I grew up in Michigan, and I have special ed and general ed, both teaching and administrative credentials. Got both building and central office administration degrees. I'm a supervisor of special education. I hold teaching endorsements in the area of cognitive impairment, emotional impairment, and autistic impairment. And I'm approved as a curriculum resource consultant in all of those areas. I've most recently worked as a contributor with the Quality Matters and the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, working on the national standards for quality teaching. Years ago, I worked as a PT3 consultant through Saginaw Valley State University, where I spent 2 years helping local districts and intermediate school districts prepare to integrate technology into their curriculum. That was a good time. I've also worked as someone who has advocated at the national level. Years ago with Jamie Fitzpatrick, I was the state team representative to the Educational Secretaries Conference on Technology and Education. I have served as a board member for McCall, and many years ago, I was the originator of SIG telecommunications for McCall. I was the first director. Currently, I'm working in a number of different areas very much aligned with what we're doing here today. I'm working with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching Improvement, Leadership, and Development. It's called the iLead program. University of Mississippi and the Oxford School District are one of 11 organizations that are working with schools and higher institutions of higher education to look at utilization of improvement sciences for program development and improvement. I'm also working with the CEDAR group out of the University of Florida. That's a collaboration for effective educational development and accountability reform. We're looking at ways to get inclusive principal leadership things put into place so that we can train future administrators to look at including students with disabilities in general ed environments as much as possible. And ultimately, my research examines how theory, policy, and processes support and impact educational leaders in their implementation of effective differentiated instruction, programs, and services for all students. And I see online and blended learning just one of those ways that we can differentiate instruction.
That's fantastic. Like I said, feel really fortunate to have you here. You seem so busy and you're involved in so many things. I'm especially appreciative of your Michigan background. That'll certainly help our viewers tremendously. So Mark, you did allude to the fact that you published several works related to this particular topic that we're discussing today, works that I personally believe that all educators should be reading. Could you please share a little bit about these works and perhaps highlight some of the things that we as educators in K-12 schools should pay particular attention to?
Yeah, it's interesting because all of a sudden, with COVID-19 of 2020, a lot of things that I have worked on for the past few years just all seem to have been published at the same time. Some colleagues and I, through our work for MVLRI, did a state policy scan of online charter schools to look at how special ed is being provided and how we can look at issues related to compliance and funding. And that was the report that I alluded to earlier about going to the state superintendent, the former state superintendent. And Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute was kind enough to allow us to not only present that at AERA, but we also have recently had that journal published in the Journal of Special Education Leadership. Mary Rice and I have a paper that just came out in Educational Forum that talks about orienting teacher preparation programs to better support students with disabilities. And I think incredibly in alignment with what we're doing. I work with Dr. Ray Francis out of Central Michigan University. He and I are looking at this whole idea of process improvement guidelines. It aligns really well with the improvement science through the Carnegie Foundation. But what we're doing is we're taking Showalter and Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, and we've added a few steps and process improvements. A big part of that is taking both qualitative and quantitative data and sitting down with rubrics and teams, professional learning communities, or communities of practice to make a value judgment on whether or not a student has achieved or not achieved certain goals and objectives. And I'm in the process with Dr. Francis at writing this up as a way for special educators to utilize our visual scaling to help with goals and objectives. And I think it would be incredibly salient based on what we are experiencing now with COVID-19. And finally, a long time ago, I wrote a book chapter. It was talking about how policies in Michigan kind of backfire for students with significant disabilities. And that really was a look at how the disparity between intermediate school districts across the state really impact how service delivery systems and provision of special ed services are administered to students. And although was out in 2015 and it wasn't specific to online learning, I think it has some pretty interesting and salient features that we can incorporate today.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Clearly there is some discrepancy in the field, as far as can we really provide the adequate supports that students need in an online or a virtual or a remote learning setting. So the overarching question, can we actually do that? Do you have any thoughts on that? How that can be done?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I think we have to recognize and realize right now is what we are doing is we're providing online experiences for students, especially students with disabilities. And one of the challenges that I think we have is we were forced into this in a very reactive mode. Everything I know of and believe about special education is it needs to be proactive. And it really, really needs to be based on what the student currently needs. Before I get started into that whole line of thought, I gotta say a couple things. One, there are no easy answers here. An IEP, an individualized education plan, is individualized. So although the work that I did with MVLRI on that report talks about supporting students from a categorical or an eligibility perspective, I really think we have to begin with what the student individual needs are. Our solutions must be tailored to meet those needs. And educational programming teams are going to have to do a lot of reflective thought based on some anecdotal and incidental artifacts that hopefully they're collecting now to really come up with what the student needs. When they sit down, they're going to have to come up with what's called a PLAF the present level of academic and functional performance. We need to be assessing our students with disabilities to see if online or blended learning truly is going to meet their identified needs, their goals and objectives. And if so, how are we going to incorporate that into providing for free and appropriate public education for those students in a least restrictive environment? We have some concerns that are out there that I think school systems are now really finally addressing, and that's accommodations through Section 504 and 508, making sure that we have accessibility in our technology, in our supports, in our hardware. A concern that I have, and that's really coming up now, is how do we make sure that we don't violate students' educational rights through the access of records, through the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So those things all need to be attended to. So I think as we are looking at all of these things, we've got an opportunity to utilize COVID-19 of 2020 as a good baseline to see, is online or blended learning something that we truly want to explore with students with disabilities? And if so, how do we take the information that we've been given and think very thoughtfully about it so that when we come together as an IEP team, we can make some good instructional goals and objectives to plan our interventions.
Thank you. That's encouraging to hear. There's a lot to it, no doubt. And I believe that this kind of information, like you just shared right there, needs to be shared over and over again with K-12 educators. As like I mentioned, there just seems to be some general misunderstandings about whether or not we can provide this kind of support in online environments.
Well, one of the things I think we need to recognize is when we look at online learning, a lot of times we're looking at traditional academics in the core content areas. But online learning for students with disabilities can also involve things like teleservices. There are companies and organizations out there that are providing online speech and learning, speech and language services, or occupational therapy. One of the other things that I think we really need to do is to have some critical conversations and crucial conversations and see if our students with disabilities are truly ready for online learning. Michigan Virtual has a tremendous amount of resources out there. The online learner readiness rubric, I think, is something that it really needs to be a starting place for all parents and students and professionals if they truly want to explore this as an opportunity for kids with disabilities. I'm also very concerned about the inequities of infrastructure. We need to make sure that we've got appropriate web accessibility. Again, Michigan Virtual has some tremendous resources around that whole idea of web accessibility. I also think that we need to make sure that we are providing best practice instruction. National standards for quality online courses, teaching, and programs, I think is a huge opportunity for people to really explore. Do we have the bandwidth? Do we have the scalability? And do we have the ability to provide these very important services in an online environment? You're also seeing a lot of professional organizations and advocacy groups springing up now and coming together to really look at how you can pull things together. There's an alliance, I believe it's called educatingalllearners.org, where they've got some excellent information out there. And then from a technical, practical perspective, obviously, since an IEP is a legal document, we have to make sure that we're providing legal supports in a way that is not only defensible, but is designed to allow students with disabilities to get their potential, meet their potential. And I'm a big fan of Wright's Law, WRIGHTSLAW. And they've got something out there that talks about how do you deal with IEP issues during the coronavirus perspective. I don't really want to get into a lot of the legal pieces because that I think gets a little bit beyond what we're talking about here as far as the practice. But as we are sitting here exploring the potential and the capability of this occurring in the future, the technical and legal aspects of special education really need to be forefront when we start talking about the practical interventions and applications of online learning.
Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is that right now what schools can do especially during this current crisis that we're in with the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, we can start being mindful of some of these pain points that we're experiencing and starting to address those in a more proactive way, so that when there's other extended school closures, we can be ready for that and be a little bit more thoughtful and impactful with how we address students. Would you agree?
Yes, we have for the longest time in Michigan wanted to figure out, how do we deal with snow days or ice days or fog days? And I think what COVID-19 has done is showed us that, yes, we can put online experiences out there for some students, but based on where you are in the state and your hardware capabilities or your internet capabilities, how scalable your technology is, really is the least common denominator for your students. I know here in Mississippi, we put all of our courses online, and I have removed a lot of my video because there are some of my students that do not have a very good internet access, and their bandwidth is just not able to deal with that. So I'm having to adjust what I know about what best practice educational opportunities online are based on the current realities of our students. And I think that's going to be a huge piece when we look at whether or not we can move online education for students with disabilities forward. We're going to have to really address infrastructure needs. Another thing we have to address is training needs, not just instructional training for our teachers and our educators and our support people, but I really think that we have to get training for not only our students, but our parents, because we're being asked to support our parents in a way that we've never had in the past. And so part of an IEP to me is talking about, how do we support parents so that they can be partners in educating their students, their children.
Right. That's so valuable, Mark. You're absolutely right. And let's stick with that theme of parents. So we know that parents of students with disabilities are also facing these new challenges, as you're mentioning, right? Related to the remote learning that we're all pushed into right now. Do you have any particular or specific advice that you have for parents as they navigate this new reality?
I think I have a few. As a parent of 5 grown adults myself, I think I have a little bit of experience. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of the parents for your efforts. You've been thrust into instructional support roles in ways that you probably never imagined, and I gotta believe it hasn't been easy for you. And I think this is especially true when you're dealing with students with disabilities. I know one of the things that I always did when I was a teacher was we attempted to give support so that students with disabilities could transfer and generalize from the classroom to the environments where they're actually going to use the information. And I know, especially for some students, especially students with autism, that learning things and being asked to do instructional things at home that are foreign to them might be causing some significant challenges. So thank you very much for the work that you've done, and thank you for supporting education that way. But I think that the couple things I'd like to say is, for the moment, we need to realize that this isn't normal. I even would like to go as far to say, I don't think this is the new normal. But I really think that this has been a blessing and a godsend in a couple of ways, because I think people have wanted to try online education for their students with disabilities. And this was an opportunity that we never would have been able to replicate had we intentionally done it. So for the moment, realize that this isn't normal, but take this as an opportunity to spend time with your child and get interested in their projects. Your teachers are sending home information and resources and activities that I think are a good start. One of the things I think you should really try to do is to extend those opportunities for your son or daughter. You know where your son or daughter is at in interest. If you are experiencing some things as far as activities that are not of interest to your child, contact your son or daughter's teacher and say, is there a way that we can do it in another way? Can we differentiate the instruction? One of the things I think we also need to do is take this as an opportunity for you to learn uh, new technology skills, both hardware and software. I know this is beyond where our discussion is now, but I am a huge fan of what Microsoft is doing through their immersive reader or their Office Lens or OneNote. They are putting a lot of assistive technology software and embedding it within their existing Office suite. And the nice thing about that is they're giving it away. You can get your own Office account that's virtual, and you do not have to have the desktop version. So use some of the technologies that are out there and learn them. See if you can expand them into where your son or daughter is going, because if you're truly going to be exploring utilizing online or blended learning for your son or daughter, I think you're going to need to have a lot more technological skills than you have now. Another thing is I would really encourage you to follow my Twitter chat. I'm finding and reposting an awful lot of good open education resources that I think are tremendously supportive to parents as you're dealing with all of these issues. And finally, this has nothing to do with technology, but get your kids outside. Let them run around and get some exercise and some fresh air. Sitting in front of a screen all day is not a thing that a lot of our kids need. Let them run and jump and cut and paste and get dirty and jump in mud puddles the way they used to. What COVID-19 has really showed us, in my mind, is it really truly takes a village to raise an educated child. And more than ever, I really think we need to create a partnership between schools and parents. You've got a strong voice in the IEP process. Utilize this experience as an opportunity to really talk from a position of strength as to what your son or daughter is capable of doing online. And even if it's not written into an IEP, you can utilize a lot of the online technology and resources that you have at your disposal as an extension to either support differentiated instruction or just to help your son or daughter explore interests in areas that they may not have access to in school.
Yes, we really do need to always keep in mind the role that the parents and even other family members can play in supporting students learning remotely. There are both challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunities, like you mentioned. Okay, Mark, so I've one more global question for you. As an accomplished researcher with extensive knowledge of the educational process, what do you feel we need to be studying as schools are facing the possibility of adopting online learning at an unprecedented scale?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that everything we have been doing, whether we want to or not, has been kicking off a tremendous amount of data. And someone who studies policy and practice, I'm hugely interested in taking that data and turning it into actionable information. I'm pretty anti-data-based decision making, because if you're making decisions based on data points, I think you're making poor decisions. I think we really need to take our data and turn it into information. And that leads me back to this, the things I'm doing with the Carnegie Foundation and the work that I'm doing with Dr. Francis at Central Michigan. We've taken the continuous improvement cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act, Showalter and Deming's improvement cycle, and we've added to it in a couple steps. And we've also taken this between the steps where we've added a recursive practitioner section where we intentionally are asking people to sit down and make some value-added decisions as a group before they move to the next area. And one of the things that I really want to encourage people is to take this data and run it through a process, a proactive process, so that you can take an introspective look into the variables and elements that you've experienced up to this point. Because I believe we got a tremendous amount of qualitative insights about things that are happening now. And people are going to want to figure out, how does those qualitative insights fit into the quantitative standardized scores that we're going to eventually be having to consider again. I'm really intrigued by this idea of what are we going to do with this void of standardized assessment, quantitative assessment data, when we, especially disabilities, growth or proficiency models. So I really think that we need to utilize assessment and evaluations in a way that's intelligent and reflective about what's going on now. And Ray and I have something called visual scaling that we're working on, where we're taking both the qualitative and quantitative data, we're comparing the results to a rubric and assigning it a scale. And this is done with groups, it's a group processes. And then we encourage people to make it visual so that they can take actionable steps to further the growth of their constituents that they're holding themselves accountable to. One of the challenges I think we have as educators is we don't have enough time to move things forward the way we should proactively. We're all very reactive. I tell my administrators in training, the immediate gets in the way of the important. And one of the challenges is we have got to make all of this qualitative and quantitative data that is coming out through this COVID-19 and make it actionable. And that's going to require a lot of proactive time.
Thank you. That's music to my ears. That's the whole MO of Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute is research is great, data is great, but so what? What can you do with it? How can we actually put it into practice and use it to help kids move forward? That's fantastic. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your thoughts on what we need to do to support students with disabilities in the remote and virtual learning environments. But before we go, do you have any parting thoughts for educators?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all of your hard work. Like the parents, I know you've been thrown into a situation where you may not feel comfortable. The nice thing about this is there are no wrong answers. People come to me and say, you know, how do we do this? How do we do that? And I always say, I don't have any answers. I have a lot of information and ideas. And I think one of the things that we have learned is we all have a lot of information and ideas. Now we need to go back to our schools and our programs through our professional learning communities and our communities of practice to do what I just talked about earlier, a minute ago. How do we take this data and turn it into actionable information for future areas? I think it may sound strange, but we've got a pretty unexpected gift here. We've all been forced into an externally defined instructional situation. And in essence, we've all become part of a very interesting petri dish. Let's utilize this as an opportunity to collect the baseline data so that we can support the development of future sound instructional blended and online learning environments for students.
Thank you so much. I love your perspective.
Thanks.
Mark, again, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time and sharing your expertise. I know you are so busy. Certainly appreciate that. For everybody else who's viewing this recording, feel free to reach out to Mark and connect with him through LinkedIn or Twitter. You can get a hold of him in a bunch of different ways. I know Mark, he'd love to hear from you and he'd love to share his thoughts and experiences with you on a one-on-one basis as well. Okay, so as we end this session, I'd like to point out once again that we do have a lot of learning continuity resources available to all schools, and that's available at the michiganvirtual.org website, and that's michiganvirtual.org/learning-continuity. We have some readiness rubrics as your schools are starting to move into teaching in remote learning. There's rubrics for school leaders. There's also a readiness rubric for teachers. We also have some digital content available for students. So, go ahead and check out what content is available on the website. And we also have some professional learning resources and content available as well. And as I mentioned before, we do have this webinar series. So going to the Learning Continuity webpage, you'll see all the recordings that we have available on demand for you. And we also have a community of practice. It's set up through a Facebook page. So if you go to the Learning Continuity webpage at Michigan Virtual, you'll be able to follow some links to get you to the Facebook page, and you can join. There's great conversation. There's nearly 3,000 people connected at this point, and teachers and administrators sharing resources, thoughts, and ideas to help everybody not only survive this rapid shift to remote learning, but also to thrive in that kind of an environment. So take advantage of that opportunity. And we do also have a planning guide for school leaders available. And this is a deeper look into all the different facets that a school system and a school leader need to look at as they're making a shift into remote learning environments. So again, thank you for your time. I'm Chris Harrington, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you. Feel free to reach out at any time. My email address is right here on the screen. It's charrington@michiganvirtual.org. I'd be more than happy to share more information about this particular topic or any other topic that you may have some interest in. You can also connect through Twitter or through my personal Twitter, which is CHarringtonEDD, or also the Twitter ID for Michigan Virtual is @MichiganVirtual. Thank you so much. Take care, and I hope this was helpful to you.